A lot of times we get people asking why you picked the movements that you picked that are a part of it. So if you could kind of list the movements and then why that is what you chose to be a part of the screen, and describe that.
Sure. You know, it's funny. You know, people ask me all the time, and the one thing people ask is this a sport-specific test? And I'll say no, it's not. This is designed to be a movement-specific test. And the reason for that is I've yet to read any papers from Hewitt, Power, Stearns, Myers, whoever, that says that this movement is only associated with risk in soccer or basketball or football. So really what we did is we went back to the research, and I looked at all these research papers and said, what are they doing? When they look at biomechanics, what kind of movements are they actually looking at? And that's where we pulled a lot of these movements from. So the movement assessment consists of some core tests. We use the plank and the side plank. And part of that is initially when we first chose the planks and the side planks, it came about from some work that we had done at the University of Tennessee, and this is when Pat Summitt was a basketball coach there. And those were 3 tests that she did with all of her athletes. And so we combined a lot of the athletic tests that a lot of the teams were using as core testing. And what we found out since then, and DeBlazier published a really good paper in the American Journal of Sports Medicine towards the end of this last year, that looked at the plank and the side plank as being a really good test for core stability and really kind of giving an indication for lower kinetic chain risk. One of the other movements that we look at is squat. Why squat? Because number one, squat is probably one activity that every single athlete's going to do. If they're doing strength and conditioning, they're going to be doing squats. And we started looking back at the squat back in early 2000 and started to identify some certain movement patterns. We call it a lateral shift, which since then the research has called it a lateral displacement of the pelvis during the squatting motion, much more articulate than I, but it's essentially the same thing. And originally how we started doing it was we took a plumb line from cervical spine down to your sacrum, and we would measure how did your hips stay within that plumb line during a squatting motion. And we know that if you shift your weight over to one side, now from the research, that you get much more load on that side, there's much more EMG activity on that side, there's more weight to that side. And so we were seeing this early on in our athletes, especially we would see that in body weight conditions, and we would see that carry over to loaded conditions would even get worse. So that's part of why we looked at the squat. The single limb stuff really came directly from the research. The single leg squat, the single leg hop. The hop plant was more of a multi-directional a movement that we wanted to use in a controlled environment. There's a lot of different ways that you can do it. Some of the limitations of technology, we kept it within a very short range. So the hop plant is forwards, backwards, lateral, and then medial. And why do we do single limb? Because we know that limb symmetry index, comparison of your right side to your left side, is very, very important. But we also know, and that's part of what I love about using the sensors, is that it's not just, can you control that frontal plane motion, magnitude. When I say that, I'm referring to magnitude. How much does your knee move from varus to valgus? But one of the other things that we know is the speed at which that motion occurs. If we go back to our biomechanical literature, if we go back to our biomechanical textbooks, we know that speed has a lot to do with force. Obviously, if I do a 1-inch punch very slow, not a lot of force, but I do it fast, there's a lot of force. And so one of the things that we find is by being able to measure that speed in multiple single limb activities, it actually gives us a good indication of risk, but also where we can work on.